We're the people that God put in the world to fix the place. And I don't think we appreciate the enormity of the responsibility and the incredibly sacred privilege of the task. We're not presenting the Torah as the tool with which we can fix the world. Tikun Olam doesn't make the demands of the Jews that it ought. Our place to stand is Israel. And the lever that we've been given is the Torah. Our job is to move the world. That's a heroic task. We're here to serve creation.
Welcome to another episode of Return of the Jew from the 𝗔𝗍𝗫 podcast channel. In today's show, I had the great honor of sitting with Rav Mike Feuer, Torah scholar, accomplished Jewish historian, and pioneering founder of the Jewish Heroism Project. Having recently collaborated with Rav Mike on the production of a brilliant video series that takes people on a Jewish hero's journey, I was keen to get him into the studio and discuss his own life story. From his childhood as a conservative Jew, through his life-transforming experiences hiking American mountain ranges, to his studies in Israel and creating a family with his wife and 5 kids, Rav Mike's pathway to living a Torah life has been broad, creative, and one of deep exploration. About himself, he writes that his life mission is breaking down walls to build up consciousness, and I've certainly felt that vibe as we got to know each other. If you like this content, please don't be shy to like and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for joining us. Rabbi Mike Feuer. Rav Mike, how are you, buddy?
Well, thank God. It's great to see you here in your home base.
Yeah, exactly. We threatened to do this many times, having just worked on a really fascinating project together, which we'll talk about later, how to be a Jewish hero, which I learned a tremendous amount, as you know. Very excited about it. But I wanted you in fact, remember how we first met? I contacted you.
That is correct.
Because I wanted to do a series of history podcasts. And a guy in my...
Which we could still do someday.
We could still do, definitely. But some guy said, yeah, I really like this guy. And I got in touch with him. And then before you know it, we work on this other project. And now we've come sort of full circle, which I'm pleased anyway. And you, for me, fall into the category of someone who came back to Judaism having not been born religious, like
Correct.
me.
Correct.
Like me. So we're called Baalei Tshuva. And so I'm always fascinated to hear people's stories about like what, why, when, what were you doing? And like, how did it get to that? And then of course, now you took it further, like in terms of education, where you actually said, I'm going to be religious and I'm going to be a rabbi and then a teacher and then doing all these things like what you're doing now with the Jewish Heroism Project. It's a fascinating journey to me.
Sure, but let's not put the cart before the horse, because I got a lot to say about that end piece.
Exactly. So I guess to start with, background.
Sure. I'm an American. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio.
Which year, born, what?
I was born in 1974, proudly part of Generation X.
2 years before me.
And really part of Generation X. I mean,
right.
Growing up with, 2 working parents and a wide open environment, public school my whole life, all the way through a master's degree. At the same time, very strongly Jewish. I mean, it's true that I am a Baal Tshuva, and I really kind of own that identity in many important ways, which I guess we'll come to. But that's not to say that I didn't grow up Jewish. Very strongly identified. Also, very active in the conservative movement in America. That's sort of was the flagship movement when I was growing up. It's on the rocks at this point. Mm-hmm. Youth group. I went to Jewish summer camps. I was very involved. My mother was a Jewish professional. Oh, wow. So we were quite deeply embedded in the community. At the same time, as much as we had, say, Friday night dinners in our house, which were very lively, and my friends wanted to come because it was family and discussion, we'd all go out, for movies afterwards or something. My students taught me to say we had Zachor and not Shamor, right? We remembered it was Shabbat, but we didn't exactly keep the rules.
Right.
And
I'm sure it was really nice, though.
It was excellent. It was very substantive. Right. I was the, so to speak, religious one amongst my friends growing up. At the same time, once I got to college, the lifestyle is somewhat confining.
Right.
And so I just did what most of my peers did, which was ditch it. Not in an aggressive, I'm done with this. I didn't have any issues. On the contrary, it just simply didn't fit being in the mountains. I went to Colorado College, which is a little liberal arts school at the foot of the Rockies.
Right.
And what I wanted to do was be in the Rockies. in every possible way. I majored in geology and just deeply embedded in the environment of the Colorado Rockies, which a part of me still lives there. It's a spiritual home for a piece of me that doesn't get a lot of attention these days.
It's such a beautiful, amazing place. I've been Colorado. I've been to Denver. I was filming in Denver many years ago. But mountains. I remember mountains.
Sure.
All around.
It's an incredibly rich environment. And because I was studying geology and the ecology of the region, I put all my efforts. Plus, I learned to rock climb. And so my spare time was also in the mountains. My life was about rocks. Basically, it was about rocks. It was quite satisfying. I'm not one of those 𝗙𝗪𝗓 stories that I always felt something was missing. On the contrary, I didn't feel anything was missing. I was surrounded by good people. We cared about the world. However...
What was Jewish... Because I know it sounds like it was packed with Jewishness, but did you relate that to this is my identity? It sounds like to me as when you got to college, it's no, it's not my full identity. It's not primary. So I'm going to do what I got to do.
Well, it's an interesting question because when you're in high school, you don't really think about identity as an abstract. I grew up. This is what we do.
We're just alive.
We were just alive, and I was probably more contemplative than the average high schooler, but nonetheless. I didn't make a distinction between Jewish practice and Jewish identity.
Right.
When I got to college, I began to discover, I was still Jewish, proudly Jewish. Things mattered to me. I remember when Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated, I was in college. Right. And that was a moment of really deep Jewish identity. People coming up to me and saying, wow, I'm so sorry to hear, which is interesting as an American Jew, but that's its own story. But Jewish practice, I hadn't really found any sense of attachment or real integrity, or frankly, any real need. I had a meaningful life. I got very involved in environmentalism, got very involved in the contemporary issues of American society as much as any college student is really involved in thinking about them and learning about them. But that was when I began to explore the sense that I'm deeply Jewish. I didn't really have an outlet for it other than my own personal consciousness. I should say as well, God has always been a companion to me. Not necessarily in a clear sense, and especially I had a deep spiritual awakening in end of high school. My 3 closest friends and I went on a backpacking adventure for about 21 days in the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee, North Carolina wilderness area, and discovering what it was to be away from the built environment in a world that doesn't reflect the hands of man.
Right. Was that the first time you really went out into the wild? I mean, it sounds like you were.
Yes. I mean, growing up, we dabbled, liked hiking, but this was, a 7-day loop and a 14-day loop and everything in between it. That's
camping.
Backpacking. Yeah. Moving constantly. And for 14 days to carry everything that you need for 14 days is quite a project. Yeah. Aside from the actual physical effort, right. You don't simply just throw stuff in a bag and go. The amount of planning and thinking and learning, it really changed not my life in general, that's true, but specifically the way I understood our material society and what it meant to be a human being. I have a very clear memory once we're walking down the trail and my friend must have found a dollar bill in his pocket and he turned around and he said, "Here, take this." And it was this alien, strange thing. We'd been in the woods for over a week. Right. What is this? What do you do with it? It's useless here. Obviously, there's a certain romanticism and naivete about that, but that is something that really stands out in my mind.
Because you separated from materialism.
And I was reading very deeply about radical environmentalism at the time. I don't know if you've ever encountered the works of Arne Naess and the idea of deep ecology. It's a very pagan worldview, which sort of puts humanity in its place, so to speak, as just another part of the planet, and then makes an argument that we're essentially a cancer on the planet. It's not the most life-affirming perspective, but it has a deep impact on the modern environmental movement. And so I began to feel a sense of place. Mm-hmm. I have a tremendous recollection of sitting. I've always been a morning person since I grew up, sitting and realizing that the birds actually sing before the sun rises. They're greeting the sunrise. And you can sit in the dark and know the sun is coming because the birds begin to sing.
That's beautiful.
And that to me awoke something in me that took me to Colorado, that kept me very attached in an almost pagan sense to, like I said, a world that wasn't reflective of the works of humanity.
Did it make you think big in terms of the creator of all of this stuff?
Yes. I didn't think big. It was much more visceral. like I said, God was a companion. I felt a sense of presence. My senior year in college, I wrote my thesis on avalanche, on snow as a mechanical and thermodynamic system and avalanche formation. I had a bunch of friends who were backcountry skiers. I actually don't like to ski myself. I don't like to be cold or wet, but I was fascinated. I actually had a friend who died that next winter on Jackson Hole Pass in an avalanche. We were kind of cutting the edge, or they were. I was watching. But
you were the Jew.
I was exactly. I was the Jew who was studying the phenomenon. But I spent that winter 3 times a week going up to about 12,000 feet on the backside of Pikes Peak.
How old were you then?
That winter was in 2021.
Oh, you're later, right.
2021, exactly. I think it was 21.
So you were always like, from after you left school, you were seeing big things.
Yes.
Big nature.
This is my point, is that 3 times a week for a half a day, cross-country skiing out and then hiking up to 12,000 feet alone to do some studies and et cetera. And I like the science thing, but that sense of stillness and presence. And later I discovered, one of my teachers said to me, that what it is to be a Jew is to know that you're never alone. Mm. And it made perfect sense to me.
Because you felt it.
I was never alone. I never felt alone. I've traveled a lot on my own, but I never felt alone.
You must have been in amazing shape.
I was in incredible shape at that point. I mean, yeah, hiking up to 12,000 feet 3 times a week, climbing, and
So because there is an element of that as well. When the physical body is doing well, again, you can worship it and it can be your temple, so to speak. But when you're healthy and you're living like part of nature, like animals are healthy.
Yes.
They're healthy. So when we're healthy and doing stuff, we feel very much part of creation.
Deeper, I would say, is that, the Mekubalim, the mystics, say that the nefesh is the seat for the ruach, and the ruach the seat for the neshama. That each level of our consciousness and our existence is a platform for a higher level. So a healthy body allows, I would say, a clean spirit. And a clean spirit gives a level of consciousness and cognition that are difficult to achieve without. I'm not saying it's impossible, right, but that was my experience. It was a sense of clarity and almost a voice without words that I still associate with that very important place on the backside of Pikes Peak that I spent all that time. And it sounds melodramatic, but it spoke to me in the sense that I needed to go. I was watching my friends at the end of college cutting off their hair and getting jobs. I mean, some were lucky to get jobs as snowboard reps and to stay in the or to stay in the mountains to do. But most of us, college is a transient phenomenon, right, in general, and certainly in America, it's a beautiful illusion. Although, as we see, it can have its price these days. And I realized that I wasn't really interested in just sort of jumping into mainstream material culture. And there was something in my eyes very Jewish about that. Even then, it was starting to dawn on me that to be a Jew is to swim upstream. So if you feel things going in one direction, you should at least check yourself and say, maybe we ought to be going that way.
Right.
And by the grace of my parents and my own hard work, I was able to not get a job immediately after college. And I went off to travel, and I cut a deal with God. I said, I don't know where I'm going, but I'm looking for you. So I'll go, and you point me in the right direction.
But how did you equate, that's an amazing jump between beautiful mountains and avalanches and talking this out with God. Had you done that prior to that in your teenage years or your years growing up in the conservative movement? Because that's a conversational piece.
Well, the conversation is so important. You hit the exact correct word. I remember some point in my senior year, I panicked when I realized that this whole world in which I was living was an illusion. It may sound silly. It sounds obvious now, but like in high school, you didn't think about your identity. In college, it was a good life. It was as good as life as it gets. I don't like to talk about it with my kids because they're jealous.
Yes.
And in the result of that experience of realizing the world I was living in was illusory was I began to pray. Now, when I say began to pray, I grew up classic conservative movement. I knew how to pray. I could read Hebrew, couldn't understand a word of it necessarily. Mm-hmm. I knew the words of the traditional prayers, didn't necessarily know what they meant. But what happened is they became almost a mantra that opened up a space for me to speak to God. And the response that I got was, you don't belong here. There was no answer yet as to where I belong. I should add, we were a very Zionist family. So the idea of coming to Israel was always present in my mind. I was, at that point in college, I'd already been to Israel twice in high school. I went for a semester in college. But the religious piece didn't really speak to me. My thoughts were to come and join the army or to volunteer on kibbutz or things like that.
Yeah, the standard, what we thought about in those days.
But they were also a lot more fun.
You didn't ever, it sounds like the shape of your family didn't make you think, let's check out Buddhism. Because a lot of what you're saying is, let's be freer.
Sure.
Let's be less constrained.
Sure.
And I think without, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but without your influence of how your family brought you up, it could have gone that way. A lot of Jews I know, I mean, I didn't grow up religious at all. And I was exploring like meditation and stuff like that. Judaism really wasn't like, the God piece was always there, but it wasn't, for you, it sounds it was much stronger.
You're touching on a piece that I should have mentioned, is that I grew up with Holocaust survivors.
Oh, right.
My father's entire family that survived saw both sides of Auschwitz.
Oh,
and I grew up, that was my extended family in Cleveland. My father was a lifer. He grew up in Cleveland. He moved away for a while, but came back to raise his family.
So survivors around you?
Survivors around me, every Seder and on Shabbat and family gatherings. And there was a sense of indomitable will to be Jewish. Now, these were people who grew up very frum, and most of them, except for one couple, had left sort of 𝗥𝗘𝗧𝗨𝗥𝗡 behind in the camps. But there was no question. And they were also builders of an Orthodox shul, et cetera. I mean, it's a complicated story. It's like they would drive to the Orthodox shul. It's also the American in the 50s and 60s.
Conflicted people because they probably, because of what they went through.
Yeah.
But yet probably felt similar to you, that sense of presence. But that awful conflict of like, what have we just experienced? Yeah,
the difference is that I grew up in suburban America in the 70s and 80s where conflict was, I call it the sitcom view of life. It's going to be resolved in 30 minutes or less, right? That's the way true. Life works. Yeah. And I truly grew up that way. It was a blessed time as a human being, as a Jew. Again, it's hard to imagine.
Our children
cannot imagine.
They cannot imagine it, and it's right. It's almost unfair to talk about it because even like in England, there was none of this. What's now? There's so much pressure and noise and aggression and anger, and we were just like literally like having a great time.
Yep, and we still, at least in the States, lived with the comfortable illusion, which was also somewhat true, that if you play the game, you'll make it.
Yeah.
You go to the right school, you get the right job, you do a little work, you'll buy the house. I may be the last generation, may be the last generation for whom that wasn't just a complete myth. But it didn't satisfy.
Right.
It didn't satisfy. And so by the time I was at that point in college where I needed to make that decision, I said, I can't do it. And yes, there was an enormous amount of privilege because I didn't have to. But there was also a sense that if I do this now, if I take the next step onto the moving conveyor belt of society,
I'm going to die.
No, that I will fail.
You'll fail.
It was a sense of, there was a risk. I remember because I don't like to travel. My kids laugh because I've been to many places and done many things, but I actually really don't like it. I'm a homebody. Like you wouldn't believe. I came here this morning. I'll have to recover this afternoon. But I knew that I could not stay where I was. And so for various reasons, my destination was Australia, which is about as far away from Colorado as you can get, although they do speak English there, more or less.
Weirdly. I love the Aussies, don't get me wrong.
I love it. It's a great place, but I can't tell you how many times I just completely lost the thread of a conversation because...
Yeah, it's easier for us because we're South Africa, Australia, and the Brits.
Sure.
It's very similar. The Americans like, huh?
Yeah, I missed it many times. But it was a great place to adventure because wherever I went, I was forced to encounter two things. People know that I'm a Jew.
You wore a kippah?
No, I wasn't wearing a kippah, although I always had a big beard and I look very Jewish. Okay. And for a long time, my chosen style of hat was kind of a flat brimmed. It wasn't exactly a fedora. It was like an outdoor camping hat is what it was. But together with the beard, I had a number of people who just assumed I was an Orthodox Jew.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was, at the time, I had made the commitment to myself to read one chapter of the Tanakh a day. I realized at a certain point at the end of college, in addition to prayer, that here's this book. It's our story. I've never actually read it. I'd read pieces in the weekly Torah portion, but I'd never read it from the beginning to the end. The type of person I am, which I think this says it all. I said, well, okay, let's do that. One chapter a day.
From the beginning.
From the beginning. I went for almost 13 years, I think. Just kept going back to the beginning. And it was an incredible adventure. So here I am all over Australia and places like Egypt and other places, just reading the Bible.
Excellent.
In a sense that I remember once, this was already later, I found myself on Tisha B'Av in a campground in northern Wisconsin. And I knew it was Tisha B'Av because at that point I was also tracking the Jewish calendar. And I read the book of 𝗥𝗘𝗧𝗨𝗥𝗡, of Lamentations, by the firelight, alone in this campground in northern. And I just think, what am I doing here? This is my story. This is an incredible place. I love it. It's beautiful. But how did those two come together? Right? And I think that's so much of what it means to be a Jew in our world.
Right.
There's a sense of alienation almost wherever you go, and yet an ability to adapt. You know, they say the Jews are just like everybody else, only more so, right? You can really fit anywhere, but there's a risk that you might fail to be a Jew. So that sat with me for a long time, that feeling.
But you were also aware of that. In my
Deeply aware.
Most, let's say, secular Jews, I'm not sure if they're aware of it to that extent. That's very intense. Like that's a very intense.
Like I said, I wouldn't characterize myself as a secular Jew.
Understand, yeah.
And I am a Baal Tshuva in the sense that the commitment of Torah and mitzvot
was around you.
Very big. It was around me. And I should add that those friends that I went on that backpacking trip in high school, all three of them ended up at Aish Torah within a year or two of going to college. One never even made it to college. He's still here in a kollel in Ra'anana, very happy, beautiful family. Right. The others have gone their various ways, but they were kind of pulling at me the whole time.
Hang on, who went first to Israel of the group?
What was his name?
No. Did you go first?
No. I went off to Colorado and was perfectly happy.
I see.
And they all started to bombard me with these messages. Come, we've discovered the truth. And so remember, I was the religious one in high school, right?
Right.
And what was my response to them? No, you just chose a bad school. Like, I'm having a great time. Like, I know what your problem is. Like, yeah. But I also didn't feel the pressure because I didn't feel at the time what I was lacking. Mm-hmm. Because I said, I was deeply attached to being Jewish. Mm-hmm. It was internally satisfying.
So then how'd you end up in Israel and then really having things So
after college and traveling, and the traveling experience, I had a couple of real encounters with Eliyahu and Navi, in the sense.
Just throw that in there.
No, really, I can tell you one real quickly.
Yes, please.
At a certain point, I was traveling alone, like I mentioned, and I met up with people and did various things, but I was alone. And being alone for 6-8 months is not simple. I'm not the most social person you ever met. I've spent many times sitting in a hostel full of happy, Europeans just by myself and wanting to be part of what was happening, but feeling very separate from it. So at a certain point, I had felt like I lost my way. I was up in the Northern Territory in a town called Darwin. I kind of stalled out there. I was picking fruit because it's easy to work in Australia, and I didn't have a lot of money to travel with. So, and at a certain point, I realized I hadn't prayed. I couldn't remember the last time I prayed. I said, I gotta get out. And I walked out into the desert, into the wilderness, semi-desert, and found myself a rock, climbed up on it and sat there and just said, like, God, we made a deal. I said I would leave. You said you would show me where to go. Like, I don't think this is it. But I've stalled here. I don't know what's going on.
Help me out.
And I really, really, really poured out my heart. And then, of course, the sun started to set, so I had to go back. There was no voice from heaven. But what happens is I'm walking into the hostel. There's like a table or some chairs right in front of the door. I've never been a person that hides his expression. I tend to wear my heart on my sleeve. This guy says to me, how you doing? I said, yeah, I've been better. He looks at me, I know what your problem is. I said, really? He said, you don't belong here. True story.
Brilliant.
I said, what? He said, you're Jewish, right? Turns out he's an Israeli. He says, you belong in Israel.
I'm
floored.
So random.
I'm floored. I should say, in the background, I was waiting for these two guys. I'd given them money. We were going to buy a car. We were going to travel down the West Coast. And they'd kind of disappeared. And that was part of my angst. I sit down. tell me more. So he's speaking about, he's post-army, traveling, this is where he belongs, where all the Jews belong. He's like, you come travel with me. We're going to go down through the center. You get a van. Amazing. Great. That night, these two guys I was waiting for came back. So in the morning, I said to this Israeli, sorry. And he's fine. Yeah, great. You do you. We got 50, 100 miles out of town. Car died. Dead. Like junk. I gave him $50. I felt bad and hopped a bus and kept going. There were so many experiences like that were very clear. In the end, I did come to Israel. I came, I took all the money that I'd earned. I came here.
Was it gnawing away at you, this idea that it's like, you don't belong?
Yes.
You don't belong.
But so I came here, and you want to understand how confused I was. I was living with an old girlfriend who worked for a Meretz Knesset member, going into the old city to learn with my friends who were still in Aish, who I think one of them was married by that point. I don't remember exactly where they were in their life. I had a big beard. It looked so Jewish, but I didn't wear a kippah, to the point where little kids would run after me in the old city and say, Adoni, you lost your kippah, right? Because in Matzav, there was no way someone who looked like me wasn't wearing a kippah. And I said, no, kids, I just haven't found it yet. And I was like, I'm going to go to the army. I'm going to go to yeshiva. I'm going to go. I didn't know what to do. So I'm walking through the old Tel Aviv bus station, which is a monument to the insanity of our country. And I got the ticket fear. You ever travel, right? I just want to see my ticket. This was in the good old days where you had a physical ticket, and if you lost that thing, you're out of luck, right? And I looked, and it said, it was supposed to say April 24th, but it said March 24th. I'd wired money to my mom because she had made the arrangements for the ticket, and that day was March 25th. Looking at this ticket, I call up TWA. That's how long ago it was. I had me in Tel Aviv, and they said, sorry, sir, that plane left yesterday, you moron. No. Run down to the office, begging and pleading. Ticket agents doing that magic where they're like looking like they're playing Pac-Man. Like, it's like, okay, I got your ticket. You have to give me $450 right now.
Which you didn't have.
It was every penny I had left.
Oh.
So I said, basically, either I'm going to stay, and that's it. I have to make this decision right now.
Or you leave.
Or I'm leaving like in 2 days. I said, I can't make this decision right now. She's like, I'm holding the ticket. Can I go out 5 minutes? Give me 5 minutes. She said, fine. She took mercy on me. I went outside. I realized I can't do this right now.
You can't leave, basically.
I can't stay.
Oh, you can't stay.
To make my life decision, that's it. I'm making Aliyah. I'm going to go to the army, or I'm going to go to Egypt. I wasn't ready. I couldn't. I was so confused. There were so many things pulling at me. I left.
Okay.
I left.
How long had you been there?
I'd been in Israel at that point for a month, after traveling in Australia for a month, and I was down in Egypt traveling in Australia for half a year. I was down in Egypt as well. I've been away from home for pushing a year, all things considered.
And what had you been doing in the month? You went,
like I said, I was living with an old girlfriend.
Yeah.
I was studying in the Torah. I was traveling around. I was thinking about what to do.
Yeah.
It was traveling.
I remember those days.
Yeah.
Israel wandering.
Yeah, wandering.
Wandering around Israel.
On top of about 8 months of wandering around Australia and Egypt and other, points in between. So I was quite out on the margin of the realities of life are secondary. At the same time, it's very interesting. At the end of the day, I looked at my bank account and said, well, if that money runs out, I'm not going anywhere. It's not as easy to work in Israel as it is in Australia.
No. It's not easy to work in Israel now. We've been here for years.
That $450 ain't going to get you far.
Yeah.
It got me further then. So I went back to the States.
Okay.
I went back to the States, I had to find a job, but I still didn't want to settle. And so being who I am, I found a job working in the woods with at-risk youth in what's called a behavioral, what do we call it? We're working with at-risk youth in attempting the behavioral adaptation program. These are kids who had been adjudicated, meaning the courts had given them a choice. You can go to this camp or you can go to jail. And usually court counselors are ones that pushed them toward us. And we lived in the woods. I was in North Carolina. When I say lived in the woods, we lived in tents that we cut down the trees and built log cabin style half tents with A-frames and canvas and et cetera. Yeah. And the winter in North Carolina wasn't bad, but these camps existed all the way up into Maine. So you can imagine what the winter was like up there.
How did you find out about this? Because you're not from there.
I'm not from there because I had a profound background in outdoor leadership.
So just direct, yeah.
And I started to just do the research of who, what, where, when, where can I go? And I wanted to go somewhere where I wouldn't be stuck. I was afraid of getting stuck. I felt like I failed. I'd gone out. Remember? I said, God, I said, I'm going. You show me where. God pretty much showed me where. I could share other stories than that, but time is limited. And I balked. I balked, which is, I think, just an honest part of life. On one hand, timing is everything. And when time is not right, especially when it comes to Aliyah, it's not going to happen. On the other hand, there's a point at which timing is about seizing the moment.
Yeah, you can miss moments.
You can definitely miss moments on the personal level, on the national level. So I worked in the woods for 2 years.
But the push never goes away.
The push never goes away because the push came from within. The push is from the neshama, I've come to realize.
100%.
The push is from the neshama, both in general, because the neshama is the part of our existence that remembers it was once one with God. And from the neshama personally, because you weren't created as a generality. You were created very specifically to be the expression of the divine that you are. And if you don't do that, it will keep pushing you until it either achieves or you destroy yourself, God forbid.
It's like when people say the argument about like such and such is doing this, that and the other, but they're not religious, so therefore blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, but so what? Hashem always catches up with everybody because there's a thing to do. There's this mission.
Yep.
And you can run for the hills.
Yep.
But it won't make any difference because he's with you and he's like, I'm here, I'm still here.
Yeah.
I'm still here. Hi,
Yep.
hi, it's me.
No, in many ways, the life of a Jew is you can run, but you can't hide.
Exactly.
You
can't hide.
Yeah. But I was trying. And so I hid in the woods of North Carolina for a couple of years. Although I have to say that I had I always have I'm very good at justifying my behavior. Probably better than most, which is why I've gone into counseling, because I can help others unpack that. Part of my justification, though, I felt was honest, is that I realized, okay, I need to be more ready. I wanted to be in Israel, but I wanted to pay my dues. I had a tremendous, and still have a tremendous 𝗥𝗘𝗧𝗨𝗥𝗡 for the world that raised me. America, amazing place. It's a mess, got all kinds of problems, fine, every country does, but an amazing place, especially for the Jews. And as a grandson of Holocaust survivors, there's no question. And so I went to do an act of service and worked with some of the more difficult youth of America for a couple of years in a wilderness therapy environment in Carolina. I also got to actually live in the woods for 2 years, which was just amazing.
Yeah, I mean, that's also God.
It's also God.
It's also God. You
was God to
tons,
me.
probably. You learned tons.
I learned enormous things about myself. To work, to live in an environment where you are, they call me Chief Mike. I had my own little tribe. That was we used this sort of like faux Native American structure. We were the Roanoke's, or we were the, but we were living on a 290-acre peninsula out in the middle of an 800-mile shoreline lake on the North Carolina-Virginia border, taking backpacking trips in the Tennessee mountains again, or I did a 20-day river trip down in Florida, things like this for 2 years, really immersed, but with very troubled, broken children.
How was that? Because you didn't grow up in that.
I didn't grow up in that at all. Although I have to say that I grew up in an interesting social environment. On one hand, I went to public school, like I said. It was one of the better public schools in America. At the same time, while the top, say, 5-10% of my graduating class went to like Ivy League type schools, the bottom 50% didn't go to college at all. There was an interesting mix for reasons we don't need to go into now. And so I grew up in an environment where I got in a lot of trouble by the grace of God and the privileges of, being a white, Jewish, upper middle class American. I never got in any real trouble.
Of course.
So there were ways in which I connected, ways in which I felt like this is just insane. Who knew? Because I had kids that were so poor that we would catch fish and freeze them so they could bring them home for their family to eat. And forget the levels of abuse and just the general ignorance of culture. And
so interesting blend. Plus the Holocaust stuff. There's a lot going on there.
Yeah, and the sense of how broken the society was that had produced these children. That was something that really drove it home to me, is that these kids were the products of a broken society. Not as a whole, but they weren't unique. There were lots of them. These were the lucky ones who made it to a camp where there was such care and attention and thought given to their future, as opposed to going, what they call youth prison in North Carolina? Training school, as in training for jail.
Of course.
That's not why they call it that, but
training to be a professional criminal.
That's exactly basically what it does. So
this was their last chance, basically.
Yes, for many of them, and I could tell you, unfortunately, some tragic stories where I watched it be their last chance. On the other hand, I could tell you some amazing stories of kids who really came, and I had a mentor right at the beginning who helped me out. We went out for a beer one night early on, and he said to me, he's like, I want to tell you something. You're not going to save anybody. I said, that's terrible. Why would you say that? He said, because you're going to wreck yourself if you try. He says, your job is to make sure that every kid that comes through your group knows what his problems are. That's later, even more cynically, one of our sort of supervisors said to me, our job is to take these kids from tax burden to taxpayer.
Oof, that's it's dry.
It's very dry and cold, but at the same time,
there's a truth to it.
Not only is there a truth, it was incredibly important because you will be destroyed by the complex of saving these kids or saving people in general. If you don't understand that you don't have to appreciate their lifestyle, you don't have to approve their choices. You need to help them understand what their problems are and get enough control over their behavior to make good decisions. That's it.
But in a way, that is saving them.
It's as saving them as you can do, right? Because some of those choices are still going to be awful. Mm-hmm. And you're not going to necessarily like the way they live their lives, etc. But you've done is you've given them the tools to survive.
Did you feel a sense of this, again, from a Jewish point of view, Tikun Olam, and just a Jew fixing people up? Was that a driver? And when these people said those things, you're like, yeah, very nice, but I do want to heal people.
There was a tremendous desire, although this was as far away from my Jewish existence as I've ever gotten. In fact, 𝗥𝗘𝗧𝗨𝗥𝗡, right? I remember it was a terrible experience. I was the only Jew. Only forget the kids, even amongst the other staff. At one point, this council I worked with confessed to me right at the end. I've been there for 2+ years. And he's like, I'm also Jewish. Wow. I made a big deal out of my Judaism. On one hand. We used to, there was public education. Like we all ate, all the groups were separate. There were 5 groups. They had no communication, fine. But there was public space. We shared the dining hall, called it the 𝗥𝗘𝗧𝗨𝗥𝗡. And in order to have 5 groups who weren't even allowed to have eye contact, because they come from a gang culture. So it was so natural that this group versus that group. I saw fights break out over kids that had been just doing this stuff to each other, who never spoke and didn't know each other, but you're on the other team, so let's fight. So in order to keep attention, we would do educational programming. You get up in front of the whole 𝗥𝗘𝗧𝗨𝗥 and you do, and I would do about Hanukkah. I would do about all kinds of Jewish stuff. Yeah, it was. At the same time, I remember 2 days a week we cooked all our food in camp.
You weren't keeping kosher, obviously.
No, nothing. No. This is my point.
Right.
Worse than that. Like I said, 𝗥𝗘𝗧𝗨𝗥𝗡. 2 days a week, we would make all our food in camp over open fire, and it was like really intense. And you were never supposed to be alone, even though it often happened. So, happened at a certain point, I was alone with the group. 2 days, it's a little bit like Lord of the Flies. You're in the woods, and you got to feed them at the same time. If they can't have the behavior, they don't eat. I definitely sat up at 2 a.m, having not eaten dinner, in the woods in the rain with these kids who just simply can't keep it together. And we had a teacher attached to every group who would come once a week and do educational programming. The teacher walks into the campsite as I'm running around cleaning up after breakfast, and he says, do I say happy holiday? And I said, what are you talking about? He said, oh, isn't it Yom Kippur?
That's so mad.
I just finished breakfast. And like this sense of a pit opening up under me.
Oh, no.
On one hand, I believed in what I was doing.
And that Israeli from Australia. You don't belong here.
Yeah, and this sense of the bottom just dropped out.
Wow. You didn't even know?
I didn't even know.
Wow.
The previous year, I recalled, I had actually taken time off and I'd work extra time to have that. This year, it was just not on my radar.
Okay.
It fell to the side. And that, I would say, was probably as low as I've ever gone as a Jew.
Was there any violence inflicted upon the what they call the people that lead the camp? Was it
the counselors?
The counselors. Was it ever dangerous? Was it ever?
I was trained in what we like to call therapeutic crisis intervention. I was required to restrain any camper who threatened violence, was going to run away, or was going to destroy property of value. Now, a restraint is a very elegant training of how you do it with 2 people. And so I've done that. I've also hit a kid at the waist hard enough so that when he hit the ground, he wasn't going to struggle with me because he was easily my size and I didn't want to roll around in the dirt. So if I could get his face in the gravel and hopefully not break his nose, then probably I can control him and the group as well, because I'm alone and there's 9 other guys who, once the blood's in the water, you don't really know which way it's going to go. Whose side are they on? You know, so yeah, violence was both a part of the culture, although heavily controlled, and it was a tool. We would provoke crises because it was a therapeutic crisis intervention.
Wow.
Yeah, it was quite an intense environment.
I know you mentioned to me once you had a wrestling background. Did that come into play at all?
I mean, the fact is that I've always felt physically quite confident. I've faced down kids that were 6'4", big, heavy kids. And I remember once jumping out of a boat because some kid said he was going to whoop me. I jumped out of the boat and dragged him on the shore. I said, okay, then whoop me. Up in his face. I'm looking up at this kid. He's like literally, 6 feet tall. Like, whoop me right now. Let's do it. Whoop me. And he couldn't believe that. I was up in his face.
It's the only way.
It's also, you're an adult. Let's face it. When you're an adult, there's a mentality that except for the most violent kids, and those types of kids didn't make it to us. They usually were already in jail.
Right.
Yeah, it was an intense couple of years.
So then after that,
I was clear that I wanted to go back to Israel. And I was interested in pursuing my education further, and particularly in environment. So I found a program at Ben-Gurion University. There's a research station down at 𝘑𝗣𝗑𝗧𝗨𝗥. It's not the kibbutz, but the field school next to it. A research station for desert agriculture. Amazing professor took me on for grad school. He was working on doubling crop yields in villages in East Africa.
of course he was.
Oh yeah, amazing Jew.
What Israelis do.
Yeah, incredible. So I went down there. It was very funny. I was the only Jew in, maybe not the only one, but one of very few. What are this? Most of like East Asians, Chinese, and people there to learn a very isolated in the middle of the highlands of the Negev. But just to drive it home, I remember once we were learning about mud brick construction, Adobe. And the professor said, we've tried in Israel to really get this technology to spread, but our ancestors made bricks with mud in Egypt. They're not going to do it in Israel. And he looked around and I was the only one laughing. He looked at me. We had this moment of like, what is going on
Those
here?
guys are like, straight over
right
there.
on the Pakistanis. They were not getting that one.
You're right.
So I was there and I was accepted the program, scholarship, and it seemed like a great opportunity.
It's where Ben Gurion and his wife are buried, right?
I've sat on his grave for hours and hours because about a month after I got there, when frankly I already decided this wasn't really a great place for me, my father died very suddenly.
Okay.
Very suddenly. No warning. It wasn't sick. It was an accident.
Just bring the mic down a touch.
That brought all my illusions to an end. At first, I was just completely broken. I didn't really know what to do. Went home for Shiva. I came back.
How old was your dad?
53.
Young.
Oh, yeah. I was 25. And actually, like I said, it wasn't working for me before, and I wanted to stay home maybe, but my mom, she pulled that trump card. Your father wouldn't want you to quit, I hadn't told them that it wasn't working out. I was 25. I was in grad school. So I went back. And amazingly, this is a secular kibbutz. Like all these professors are like, they're not your frum type. They had gotten together while I was gone and had decided that they would commit to making a minyan once a day so I could say Kaddish.
Wait a minute. 𝗑𝗣𝗑𝗧𝗨𝗥.
In 𝗑𝗣𝗑𝗧𝗨𝗥.
The place where Ben Gurion is buried, his wife.
Yeah.
Like the last bastion of socialism.
Yeah. And these guys who are working, for saving the world, Tikun Olam, but they were incredible people.
I'm sure they
They
were.
are incredible people.
What brought that on with these guys?
They just assumed that
you would...
that was something I would need. Jeez. And it's also very important to remember something that not everybody, I'm sure you're aware, but not everybody knows, is that death is sacred in Israel.
Yeah.
People understand when this happened, when my father died very suddenly, I was on a van moving toward Ben Gurion Airport before I even had a plane ticket. The secretaries of the school they gave me a phone to take with me so they could deal with it. I got to Ben Gurion Airport. There was someone waiting who whisked me straight through all the security, everything straight like onto the plane.
Yeah, all the religious stuff drops off. It's just the Jew comes through.
And death is sacred. Loss, unfortunately, is a dominant aspect of Israeli society, and people take it quite seriously.
Yeah.
And so when I came back, they were ready for me to say Kaddish, but I wasn't ready to say it. And the line that echoes in my mind to this very day that I said, what kind of person waits to decide what they need until they already need it? They were ahead of me. They were ahead of my curve. I managed to stay here in Israel for another couple of weeks. Terrible, terrible indecision of who do I want to be? Where do I want to go? I'm going to stay here. I'm going to go home. I'm going to go to yeshiva. I'm going to go to rabbinical school. I'm going to go, and finally I broke and I went home. My mom actually had to talk me through the process of ordering a plane ticket. I was so confused and lost.
Does the sense of obligation play in your psyche? It sounds to me as that obligation works a lot for me.
Mm-hmm.
By the sound of things, it's not how your mind operates. It's where Mike is kind of like vibing. I'm not saying that in a critical way.
No, I'm laughing because 𝗘𝗣𝗜𝗏. I mean, yes and no, because on one hand, I have enough authority issues to fill a warehouse. On the other hand, once I've taken on an obligation,
you're all in.
I'm completely in to the point where I'm likely to break myself and the people around me in pursuit of it. And so that's one of the exact reasons that I was avoiding. By this point, I knew that I wanted to be, if not religious, much more of a Jew. But the lifestyle is a big ask. And I knew that if I were going to decide, I was going to decide completely. And I wasn't willing to do it because I didn't want to lose my freedom. I didn't want to lose who I was.
Right. So it's fighting the comfortable identity. But once you've got past that, then you're in.
Well, and I didn't have to get past it. It was shattered. And that's exactly what happened. I was shattered. I was shattered in deep depression. For the first few months, I didn't even leave my house.
This is back in the States.
Back in the States. The shock. It was just the shock alone. I mean, I don't go too far into the story. I was literally making eggs in my little dorm there in the 𝘑𝗤𝗏𝗧, and a German grad student came and said, like, "Oh, Pedro, your professor needs to speak to you." I was like, "What? It's this in the morning." I'm like, I'll come soon. He said, German, not a native speaker, said, "Your father died." Just blurted it out.
There he goes. Thanks for that. But
yeah,
is there any other way? But it sounds to me as that shock seriousness stayed.
True. For about a decade. It actually took me, I know a lot about grief, and I work with people, as I mentioned, as a counselor, and I've done some studying of it, and I've encountered it myself and others. And it took me a decade to realize the difference between shock and grief, which is a very important distinction that I was completely unaware of at the time. And so this was a bombshell. And as I began to put the pieces back together, God bless my mom, who really is always been there for me, but in this way, I began to say Kaddish. And at first I went back to the conservative shul where I grew up, but it didn't feel right.
After everything.
I don't know. I couldn't really say why. It just didn't feel right. It didn't feel like where I belonged. And there was this small Orthodox shul that I had some friends that were, and they invited me to come there, and it's just an amazing group of guys.
Right.
A wonderful Rav they were very sensitive, and I was always doing things wrong. I was davening from the Almond, right? They're saying Kaddish, I'm wearing shorts and doing all this stuff, and they just kept.
We don't care.
They did care, actually.
No, they cared. But they cared, but they didn't.
And they cared more about me than they cared.
That's
about,
what I meant.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. But it was an important distinction. Like there was a couple of guys that stopped coming to morning minyan because they refused to say to me that I shouldn't be davening in shorts.
Oh, I see.
But they were not comfortable. You know, like, there was that kind of stuff. But they didn't make a scene out of it. It was just they work. You work. You're here. You go there. You know. Yeah. Anyway, so in the course of that year, I began to put things back together. I went back to praying. It's always been a mainstay for me. I went back to praying, speaking to God, and I have very profound memories of praying for faith.
Formal prayer or formal prayer and
both,
yeah.
both formal prayer and this ongoing conversation, which had never really ceased, but had faded, like I said, into the background. And you know the expression bootstrap levitation?
Yeah.
Right? The idea that you grab your shoelaces and pull. If you get hard enough, you'll float. That's basically what I was trying to do. I was praying for faith. What does that mean? Like, who are you talking to? At a certain point, I realized, like, wait, who are you really talking to, Mike? If you're praying for faith, that's the most absurd thing I've ever heard. Because I was quite serious about it, too. Tears. And so on Shavuot of that year, so I guess in the secular calendar, it would be...
May, June. Yeah.
It would be the year 2000. So my father's shloshim was actually on Y2K. He died December 1st, 1999.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, I was here in Jerusalem on Y2K. It was very funny. It was Shabbos.
Yep.
I was in Harnov with my friend, the one who's now in Kola in Renana. God bless him. He took good care of me. And we went, I remember going out on Shabbat expecting like all the people to be frozen and the cars to stop. Hard enough.
Yeah, no, we carry on.
Right. We have our own calendar anyway.
Yeah.
2000, that was a long time ago.
That's right.
So, but on Shavuot of that year, after many difficult months, I made a decision. I said, okay, I'm in. We mentioned earlier this idea of missing the moment. Part of that decision was that night I stayed up all night with the guys there, wonderful guys. They learned together, and like I said, I have incredible love for that place. And the Rav, right before Shachri, gave a shiur about the missed opportunity of 1967 and not rebuilding the temple, and how you could really read Sefer Ruth as a story about someone who refused to miss the opportunity. Ruth.
Yep.
You know, and which I think is a really beautiful lens for the story.
Yep.
And it was very clear that God was speaking to me. This is it. You have an opportunity. Here you go. All the lifestyle has fallen apart anyway. My lifestyle was gone. Emotionally speaking, I was shattered. What was left was this sense of structure and comfort, and I begun to learn and pray, and it made sense. I'm a very natural Jew, And so I said, okay. The only thing left is to commit.
There's some things in our experience that are solid and unbreakable, and that's it.
Yes.
That's
Except they need, but it's the commitment that gives the vessel for that to actually be powerful and transformative. Without commitment, those things can easily break you because they'll weigh you down with guilt, and they'll make you feel inadequate, or they'll alienate you, or whatever it is. Once there's a sense of commitment, then it becomes a crucible for you to become the person that 𝘑𝗧𝗏 Baruch Hu wants you to be.
Hashem says, I'm always the rock.
Right.
But do you see me? Do you want to experience me as that? That's on you.
Right. Well, you can bash yourself against the rock for the whole of your life, or you can stand on it and build something.
Right.
And so I'd been bashing myself against it for long enough.
Well, you were hanging out with rocks forever.
Yeah, well, rock is that metaphor is not a light thing.
I was waiting for the moment in this podcast where I could say some analogy to do with a rock. I was waiting. I just did.
I got it. Yes, check.
Seller. Okay, so you're on. So that was it. You were in.
Yeah, I was in, and then to me it was very clear that the next move was Israel. I mean, truth is, I stopped. I finished my grad degree. I went back to Brandeis. Already now, Shomer Torah and Mitzvot. I decided Brandeis is a good place to go. Plenty of Jews there. Fresh Baal Tshuva. Knew very little about the Orthodox world. I'm sure you remember that phase.
Oh my God.
Like the best way to characterize it, in my opinion, is that we fail to understand how much we navigate in life by our gut. You don't think about the things you do. This is how we do it. And being a Baal Tshuva is realizing you don't have a gut anymore. You no longer have a gut.
You're like on a surfboard.
Yeah, like everybody moves left. You moved right instinctively because that was the right thing to do, right? But
now you're just like winging it.
Yeah, yeah. So that was
which let's be honest, came with a lot of conflict and problems because culturally. It's shocking, but you're like, but this is where I am now. This is the God Squad.
Yeah,
it takes time.
It takes time, and I grew up as a liberal American Jew and discovered pretty quickly that Orthodoxy is not so liberal. It's not even all that American, to be honest with you. Right. Very Jewish though. I had great people all along, and it's its own story. I could just name after name after name. Sure. People just really helped me out, and. So I was there at Brandeis for a year, although I didn't live in the campus. I davened at the Harvard Hillel, which is an amazing place.
On that point, though, I think that people like us are reshaping Judaism because of where we came from. Absolutely. It's true we entered it into their domain, and to a large extent we'll always be outsiders. At least that's what I feel. Not an outsider where I'm excluded. You're never excluded. But
culture that you're not
culture you're
a product of.
But we're bringing it in.
I would say even greater, we're expanding it. Because we live in a time in which the way things were is no longer adequate to address how things are, and certainly not where we're trying to be. And so one of the most important things is people with the profound commitment who've made that change and yet bring to the table of Torah perspectives, experiences, challenges, questions, knowledge that the traditional world doesn't bring.
You can't undo your experiences standing on those mountains.
That's
it's there forever, and that plays a part in this expansion of the Jewish people.
For sure, and I'm glad you said it, because as I keep mentioning, I do counseling work. I've worked with a lot of Baal Tshuva, and I have friends, and my experience is there are people who really cut off their past. You'd say, no, I found the light, But even kiruv institutions that will tell you, up until now, you've been broken and lost, and now you've found the light. Anathema in my eyes. Not only that, it's heresy. God does not waste time.
Yeah, 100%.
God does not waste time. I may have wasted time in that story.
Okay.
But God does not waste time, which means that as soon as I made that commitment, my obligation was berur. I had to clarify for myself, what does everything I've done up until now mean in light of who I've decided to be?
Right.
What can I bring to the table? What do I need to leave behind? It's choosing to leave something behind. It's not the same as cutting something off. It's recognizing these are the things I used to do. These are the person I used to be. And I am no longer. And for this reason and that. So that process, as you said, is messy and not quick. But after a year in Brandeis, I came to Israel to write my my master's thesis. And I've been here ever since. I came at the height of the Second Intifada, 2 weeks before 9/11.
Interesting.
Right? I mean, it's funny because my brother, God bless him, said, "Could you do this?" It was just a year after my dad died, a little bit more. Yeah. Anyway, math is a little fuzzy for me. It might even be a little bit less. Yeah, it was a little bit less.
But was your mum encouraging to you going to Israel?
My mom is a
happen?
classic mother in the sense that she kept herself out of it. She wanted what she felt was good for me. And actually, it took me years to realize how hard it was for her because I was self-absorbed in my own pain and my own experience. I was still a child, even though I was, 25. It was not easy for her, but she kept it to herself. But my brother, he's the older brother, he didn't keep it to himself. Can't do this to mom. You're going to a war zone. Dad just died, et cetera, et cetera. So 2 weeks later, my brother writes for the New York Times, works in Times Building. 2 weeks later, downtown Manhattan, or Midtown, frankly, but whatever. A war zone. I called him and said, "You can't stay in that city. How could you do this, Mom? You got to get out of there." It was perhaps not so nice, but
yeah.
So, but the reason I mentioned it is because the world was shifting, and I had to adapt, and I took a deep dive into what I might call mystic nationalism. Right, this intoxicating mix of Torah and politics and a sense of Jewish destiny. I went to yeshiva out at Yeshiva Mi'vtar in Gush Etzion next to Efrat. I was in Rabbi Ravender's shir at the time. He should be healthy and well. That was toward the end of his tenure. He was the founder of the yeshiva, but and really, really began to just absorb in every possible way the Jewish experience in its deepest sense. And it was intoxicating.
Of course. It's a very present moment.
Very present moment. The only thing I can really compare it to is like the labor and the experience of hiking to the top of a peak and the sense of clarity, light, and the wind movement and the knowledge of what you brought to bear to come there and where you could head from that spot. There was nothing, it was so immersive.
Yeah, it doesn't leave anything out. It's in a Judaism that I'm attracted to, obviously, because it feels organic and it feels like living, it breathing. So
that lasted for quite some time, but the bubble burst. First of all, along the way, I decided I kept seriously. I stuck with yeshiva for about 10, maybe 12 years. Not necessarily all full time, but I decided I should learn to be a rabbi because I figured I have so many authority issues. If I become a rabbi, I won't have to ask other people my questions. You're laughing because you understand how foolish that truly was.
Absolutely.
Yes, but at the time, that's the naivete of the 𝗏𝗏, right? Yep. But it was an incredible experience, and I got my smicha eventually with Yeshivat 𝗠𝗜𝗏𝗡 in Nachal Oat, where I was one of the founding members, and eventually became the educational director. We learned there together for a good decade. It was amazing, amazing time.
Did you ever? Interesting, because I'm pure breed 𝗏𝗏, so I was brought in by Haredim. That didn't happen to you.
I learned at the Mir for a year. I happened along the way. I was working in a post-high school yeshiva, and the Rosh Yeshiva's son needed a chavrut at the Mir, so I ended up learning with him at the Mir for a year, which was amazing learning.
Yeah,
a culture which, I used to switch my kippah on the way down in the bus because I wear like black pants, a white shirt, but I would take off the knitted kippah and put on like the velvet kippah, just to, why you're gonna cause waves.
Yeah,
I just wanted to just fit in. I just want to learn.
Right.
And it was an incredible experience, but the 𝗏𝗏 world never really got its hands on me, so to speak. I was in the settler world,
right?
And that held out basically until the expulsion, until the 𝗥𝗘𝗧𝗨𝗥𝗏, the what they call it, disengagement from Gush Katif, and that's such a clean word, isn't it?
Such a clean word. Yeah, expulsion is better.
Yeah, well, that's what it was.
Yeah,
and I was quite passionately opposed. In my, again, naivete, thought we could stop it. But by the time that we reached 𝗘𝗣𝗜𝗓, because I wasn't amongst my friends that went and moved down there a month before, I wasn't a little bit more conservative than that, small c. They just kind of laughed at us and threw us on buses and drove us back to Ofakim and said, "You want to walk all the way back to Gush Katif? You be my guest." And that really disrupted a lot of the easy sense of Torah that I had. I remember of Mordechai Eliyahu, 𝗍𝘅𝗧𝗩𝗥𝗡, tzaddik zechar tzaddik, saying, "Hayo lo tiyeh, it will never be," and I believed him.
They all did. Everyone did.
We all did.
Yeah.
Sure. Until it happened.
How could it be?
Until it happened.
Yeah.
So at that point, I just realized I needed to expand my learning. I didn't know our story well enough. I was learning Torah. I knew the Bible. But look, how did we actually get here? I've always had a passion for history. And actually, for various reasons, I've begun to teach history in the post-high school world. But I realized I needed to go further, and I decided to give myself I made the commitment to myself I was going to get a PhD level education in Jewish history, at least on a reading level. I was going to start writing papers because I'd need to. And I did. The product was The Jewish Story, my history podcast that you mentioned right at the beginning there. Out of this...
Your Hebrew at this point was much better, or all that Tanakh stuff helped?
Yeah. So listen, my Hebrew, I'm also a classic American immigrant in the sense that my reading and my comprehension in Hebrew is close to fluency level, I would say. My spoken Hebrew is as good as I need it to be because I don't really use it all that much because I kind of like English speakers. I also never had a great desire to be Israeli in the modern Israeli culture. My wife really has pushed to be, and I just doesn't really speak to me. But in Torah, I feel confident cracking almost any sefer that you're going to put in front of me. I might have to break my teeth for a while, but I know how to do that.
Right.
But the reason I became obsessed really for a few years with history was because I had this sense that if I could say how we got here, I might have a better sense of where we're going. Right? In backcountry travel, we call that backsighting. If you're in the mountains, off trail travel, you're not entirely sure where you are, but you can backsight two peaks that you know that you are on. That makes a line that allows you to draw a line through where you are to where you're headed.
Perspective. Yeah.
So I wanted to backsight because I had a sense after 𝗘𝗏𝗏 𝗏𝗏 that we as people were profoundly astray.
Haven't really recovered.
We haven't. We're playing out the consequences of that decision.
It's 2005 still.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, you could go back, but
sure.
In modern
it was a turning point. It was a turning point without question. We don't need to get into the analysis of it now, but I agree with you 100%. And I mean, that brings us up pretty much to today. We could go into further detail, but the conclusion after 6 years of producing the podcast, which was really the way I forced myself to get a clarity on the narrative. I also got to do something with that knowledge.
Of course, and give it over.
And like I said, I wasn't going to write papers. I wasn't really interested. And the academic side of me was asleep and will remain so. And every once in a while, I had these 𝗍𝘅𝗧𝗎𝗓 about going and getting a PhD. That's that side of you that grew up.
The main thing was absorbing it and then giving it over.
I wanted the story, and the only way you can really absorb a story is by telling it.
Yeah.
I've always been a storyteller. Every part of my life has been dominated by storytelling. And so after many, many years of deep immersion in the story, the conclusion I came to is that we're actually being called to a level of being Am Yisrael that we're not really aware of. And that's where the idea of heroism really emerged. Right. We're being called, it's a heroic moment.
But how did you make that link? We're now going to talk about what you're doing now, the Jewish Heroism Project. When we first spoke and you said that phrase, I'm like, the word for hero, you just think of superheroes. For me, anyway, I just think of heroism, brave soldiers running, Saving Private Ryan, images.
Absolutely.
And it's baffling in a way because that's Judaism and Rambo and Sylvester Stallone.
I've gotten a lot of pushback.
No, I know, but it's baffling for the right reasons because you're like, well, what is a hero? That's what I learned on the journey when I was working with you on the project. Is that because especially how you broke it down? It's like it's breaking down. Well, what actually is a Jewish hero?
And hopefully in an actionable fashion.
Yeah.
So part of the story that I kind of left out of my life is that I've always been a fantasy geek.
That's right. You said that.
That's the storytelling piece. And I think that everybody needs to decide what their genius is. And I don't necessarily mean genius in the classic sense of like, achievement. There's something within everyone which, given purity of expression, is unique. It might happen in a single moment. It might happen through a relationship. It's hard to define what that is. Mine is my imagination. Because I remember from the earliest age that reading wasn't immersive for me. The world disappeared. I have all these memories of my dad reading some fantasy book at the breakfast table. My dad said, "Goodbye, Michael. Goodbye, Michael." He'd like smack me in the back, like, "Goodbye." Oh, bye, Dad. And I discovered that
he was into it.
He was actually trying to get my attention.
Oh, he was trying to get your attention because you were spaced out.
He's 2 feet away from me saying goodbye, and I'm on a different planet.
I see.
And what I discovered,
you were away with the stars, basically.
And what I discovered is I actually don't need books for that.
Just need you.
I just need my mind. Mm-hmm. And it's challenging, right? It has its good and its bad sides.
Because it doesn't stop.
It doesn't stop. Also, it's a great way to retreat from the world. You can disassociate from the world. There's all kinds of unhealthy manifestations, which is true of any powerful aspect of self. But more and more, as I learned more and more, as I encountered Chassidut in particular, where I think that the fantastic had a rebirth. One could say that with the Arizal, which is really the sort of roots of what became Chassidut, although the roots really lie with the prophets, there was a reawakening of the sacred imagination within Torah. And I have become...
the freedom to let the mind wander into an ethereal world, but yet staying within the confines.
I would say that's a manifestation, but the sacred imagination is an aspect of soul, which if you look into even the Rishonim, Rambam says very clearly, it is the primary vessel for prophecy, for nevuah. Meaning the Rambam speaks about the necessity of intellectual and emotional and even physical and sort of possessions in perfection, but the imagination. Without the imagination, you will always be stuck in the world as it is, as it presents itself to you. It's the imagination that unlocks the potential of the world as it could be.
My grandfather, God bless him, always used to say, not a religious man, out of fiction comes fact. Which is such a simple anecdote. He basically was saying what you can imagine and what you can dream will become reality.
Yes. I mean, as someone who grew up reading science fiction and is now living in many of their predictions, there's no question. And so I would say that the Heroism Project, more than anything else, is a way in which I want to awaken the sacred imagination within Jews and make it actionable, to allow it to inspire us to be more than we believe that we can be, to go beyond the limits that have been placed on us by society, by our own culture, by the limitations of history. I mean, I think that the challenges are endless, and imagination is an essential ingredient to all of the solutions.
So for the sake of the audiences here who've never seen what you do, how do you do that through the Jewish Heroism Project? Through
the project, the first step was this question of what is heroism, as you said, and doing research in the world. Like, what does the world think is heroism, and discovering this idea of the heroic journey, or really rediscovering it's out there. Everybody has heard of this idea. And then saying, okay, if there is a hero's journey, what is the Jewish hero's journey? What are the stages? How do I look from creation through the present and find a journey which I can boil down into 7 steps, which wasn't on purpose. It was really just what presented itself to me when I kept fighting all these Kabbalistic numbers and structures, but they're the substrate of existence. So you can fight. You can't argue with topography. There's an old backpacking right. term, right? Yeah. You can't argue with topography.
That's right.
So what it is the first product, so to speak, is this Jewish hero's journey. It's going to be released, God willing, soon. We're working hard on it. You know, you did the backbreaking labor of the core video production. Mm-hmm. It's a video course. Mm-hmm. We're taking our time because I want to figure out a way in which it is both engaging but also at depth. A problem in Torah is always like the too much. People who attach themselves to Torah discover the portal to the infinite, but many people bounce off because the threshold is so high.
It's so overwhelming.
It's like we can't have a simple conversation. It's like we start a simple conversation and then Jews, right? We're next thing we're pulling out books off the shelf and it's 2 a.m. and then folks, I wasn't really looking for that. So I'm trying to find a way in this journey to make it accessible and actionable at depth, but in a way which is manageable, so it will draw people in.
What I was blown away by was in these 7 steps. It's self-discovery, and the way that it happened was through the storytelling of, well, basically Tanakh.
Yeah, where we got each step has an archetype from Moshe to Adam to Abraham and onwards.
And then within that, you're discovering bits of heroism that make you the complete potential hero or the actual hero.
Yeah, I think actual hero. I mean, the definition I came to for Jewish heroism is Mesirut Nefesh L'Ma'an Tov.
That's right.
Right, going beyond your limited self for the sake of the goodness of creation. That's why we were put here. Amazing story that I heard from Rav Riskin.
Yeah,
he should be healthy and well at a wedding. Just to keep it short, there was a young man. He declared a day of mourning in Efrat during the Second Intifada when a soldier was killed defending Efrat. The whole city, which is an unusual thing. Mm-hmm. Turns out this young man was West African. He was a convert. He didn't have any family, and so Rav Riskin really didn't want him to leave the world without proper mourning. But how does a young man, West African? So the backstory is he was living if I'm not mistaken, in a village in Ghana, and a Peace Corps group showed up to dig wells. Young American kid there. So this little boy asks the American, "What are you doing here?" Answer is, "Well, I'm a Jew." This kid from West Ghana had never heard of a Jew. He said, "What's a Jew?" He said, "We're the people that God put in the world to fix the place."
Brilliant.
This young boy never forgot. Grows up. He finds out the Jews have a country. The people who were meant to fix the place have a country? I got to go there. They stop him at the border. Like, wait, it's a kid. Like, what are you doing? He's like, I've come to join the people that are here to fix the place. He went through the conversion process in the army, served in the Israeli army, and died defending Am Yisrael.
Unbelievable story. Wow.
So
Jeez.
We're the people that God put in the world to fix the place. And I don't think we appreciate both the enormity of the responsibility and the incredibly sacred privilege of the task. And we're not presenting the Torah as the tool with which we can fix the world. I mean, Tikun Olam is an important phrase in American Jewry, but the challenge in the way those sort of progressive movements use it is that it doesn't make the demands of the Jews that it ought. You know that quote by Archimedes, "Give me where to stand and a lever and I'll move the world"? It's a paraphrase, but the Jews need to understand that our place to stand is Israel. And the lever that we've been given is the Torah. Our job is to move the world. That's a heroic task. We're here to serve creation.
And without the Torah as the tool, we just can't do it.
Well, first of all, we have a covenant. We'll never succeed because it's the tool we've been given. And that tool is bound up with an obligation. God created us within this covenant, and it's not really a choice. You can always choose. Like we said, you can run, but you cannot hide. And we as a people, certainly not. I mean, our history proves itself out. And once again, we find ourselves at a juncture in history. And this one, unlike any we've been at in 2,000 years, because we're in our collective existence, millions of Jews with the ability to exercise power and make decisions on a scale that we have not had for literally 2,000 years. And we're being called to a heroic posture. Not the Rambo heroics, although that may be important, et cetera, but Mesirut Nefesh L'Ma'an Tov. We need to go beyond our limits for the sake of creation's goodness.
As the deep motivation for it all.
Yes, which also means looking out for ourselves, and it also means taking care. It doesn't exclude those things, but that's the power of Torah. It's like, you can think about which shoe you put on first in the morning, what foods you eat or not, the nature of your intimate relationship with your spouse, and endless other details of life, all within one comprehensive vision of the goodness of creation. moral goodness, good versus bad, but also essential goodness, that this is the will of the maker. It's how God sees creation. And we have a capacity as humanity to reflect that, not just reflect it, to actualize it in the world around us. The world is waiting for us to do this. It's a human quality. The Jews have been committed to pursuing it. Every human can. We must.
I think a lot of Jews, especially Jews that are not affiliated with any sense of Torah or understanding of what they've missed the understanding that each Jew has a mission.
Yeah, and that's a failure of the Torah world. If we're going to talk about the Baal Tshuva, if I look at Jewish history, one of the most important and unspoken about moments in Jewish history is when the ghettos of Europe opened up. Ghettos of Europe, I mean, most of 90% of world Jewry was living in Europe at the time.
That's right.
And all the centers of Torah were there, almost all. But the vast majority of the weight. The ghettos opened up for reasons, of modernity. And a huge portion of Am Yisrael chucked their tefillin in the river and ran off to Odessa for medical school. Now, here's the question that nobody wants to answer. If the Torah was the greatest thing since sliced bread, given by God on high, how come people were so quick to get rid of it?
Right.
And Torah Jewry doesn't want to answer that question.
That's right.
And it's the same question which remains unanswered right now. And listen, every person is responsible for their own actions and their life decisions, and I'm not here to stand between anybody and God. But I will tell you this, is that the people with the responsibility to bring the Torah to the world are those who know something about it. We're the ones that are failing the Jews in the world, not a secular Jew who hasn't inherited.
How could you? I didn't know anything.
Yeah, but people love to blame.
So silly though, so childish.
Well, actually, so psychologically obvious even.
Yeah, of course. It's like blaming a child for this thing they're doing wrong that they never learned.
Right. Or blaming actually a man who, given no better options, has chosen their way.
That's right.
They've chosen their way. And it's not intrinsically bad, but we as a people have a specific mission. And like you said, if you don't understand that we are a mission-oriented people, then you're just dumping things on my head that I have to do today. A list of things I have to do today. That's not what Torah is.
It's funny because the kiruv, which is as we know, the word bringing people back, it's a messy business. It's a messy business because it's in direct conflict with the victims that are coming in. I mean that facetiously. The people that are innocent and don't know and are about to be filled up with all this information and knowledge and inspiration. But the problem is that our 𝗘𝗣𝗧, our vessel, isn't built to just input Rabbi Akiva Tatz, who is a genius.
Sure.
That's how one of my big influences in London, because he was there teaching, 300-400 people every Wednesday night at the Or Sameach, and it was like packed and you couldn't breathe. And I'm like, who is this dude? Like, what? I'm like, what? Unbelievable. But it's an extreme amount of light.
Yeah.
An extreme amount of light. And the problem is that even though I've got my criticisms of how it all played out, I'm not sure if there was any other way to do it.
Yeah.
You have to go deep because it's the real thing. And be honest with you, the Orthodox world at the time was pretty boring.
Yeah.
And they weren't inspiring.
Bourgeois.
Yeah, it was just like...
For me, it was just being broken, like I said.
Yeah.
Once I was broken, then I was available.
Right.
Which is not a path I would recommend.
Right.
But your point is taken, is that there is a certain overwhelming nature of crossing that threshold, which can't be ignored.
I was broken. That's why I walked in the building. I had what am I doing here? Questions.
Mm-hmm.
Like no Judaism. I'm like, there is something going on, and I want a Jew to tell me what that is. And boy, did they! but the highlights of it were so great that you can either run from it, which many friends
people
did.
do.
Okay, but again, they run, not hide, and all that stuff. I agree. I'm sure it's running still after them now.
Yep.
But it was. I'm not sure if there's any other way to do it. How does a person on your course, what do they get in terms of the structure? Because I'm in it. I saw it. I listened to everything. We'd made nearly 70 clips.
Yeah.
Okay. Everyone a winner. Going to be honest, because it was just the way you wrote it and you've built it is it draws you in, and you're like, where's this going? So what do people get?
Practically speaking?
Yeah, practically speaking, like what are they? What journey do they go on?
So I said there's a few elements. One is expansiveness. There's an encounter with Torah in a way in which I believe most people never really touch it. Knowledge, even the stories. Another one is inspiration, the sense of momentum that you're part of the grand story of creation, that you personally can have a role in that, not just some abstract. And the last piece is action. The goal is to crystallize that grand vision into daily actions, that if you truly want to step into your heroic self, you have guidance. It's not just a lecture about what Jewish heroism is or what it could be. It is a guide for self-transformation. That is the goal.
When you were learning in your, I guess, formative years of learning, were you a bit of a, I'm not saying rebellious student in a negative way, but like considering what you've come out with, right, which is unique, were you bothersome in the Beit Midrash? Were you like, no? What, or was that the structure of the schools, the Torah schools that you went to, that encouraged that?
So I think I was very fortunate in that in the beginning, I was humble enough to know I don't really know what I'm talking about. Trust me, I was still troublesome in my own mind. I have a hard time accepting things in general.
Okay.
But I knew how to learn and was aware that I was basically an ignoramus. Not quite Rabbi Akiva at age 40 learning the alphabet, but close enough. But then I was very fortunate in coming to Sulam Yaakov and having Rav Daniel Cohn, who is the Rav of Bat Ayin, and is an incredible soul, an incredible teacher, a huge Talmid Chacham, and an incredibly creative personality to be my guide. Both we learned Gemara, we learned the inner workings of the Torah and Nistar, and we also had every week for 7 years a men's group who sat and did personal work based around his understandings of Chassidut. So much of what I'm doing right now is a direct continuation of that experience and a desire to find a way in which I could make a vessel that makes those transformative experiences and that type of knowledge and that attachment to Torah accessible to people.
The creative side of learning is very, very important. And I must admit, in my 20 odd years of being religious, it's been a major frustration because there's a hell of a lot of learning, but it's not juicy. It's not take me to the stars and take me outside of myself.
Which is crazy. You open up the Gemara and half of it is storytelling.
I know, right?
And it's that stuff gets brushed over or it's kind of dismissed. It's like, okay, like we had a little light stuff today. We're going to get some storytelling and we'll get back to the sugya later.
It's weird. It's weird that Judaism became that. We're these storytelling warriors, and with like these, look what we've done. Look what our contribution to the arts and to entertainment. I mean, hello, Spielberg and all the Jewish crowd. They would have been steiging somewhere if it wasn't for all these films.
But notice the parallel. It's very similar to the Zionist project. It was the people who broke away from the almost self-referential structures of Torah that were able to unleash its creative powers, whether creative in the Hollywood sense or creative in the sense of we're going to purchase land and build farms.
Right.
And that creativity needs to be reunited with Torah. That is my life mission. The sacred imagination in service of Torah. The other projects I do, I'm a co-author of a series of biblical fantasy. Who's ever heard of such a thing? But I can't tell you how many people have read these books. The goal is to be a bridge to Torah, to make the Torah come alive. Orthodox Jews are saying, like, I never was able to relate to the Tanakh this way. Really? Like, you grew up with this? Yeah, but it wasn't, forget it wasn't real. It didn't move me. Right. And if Torah doesn't move you, then what's it doing?
Right. I think Rabbi Sachs was important in all of that as well.
Hugely so.
He gave it he zoomed out.
Yeah.
And it was like, whoa, what's going on here? He gave alternative narratives and this was going on. That made it very relatable. You're dealing with real humans with flaws just like you. Because when it's distant, when they're distant people, even though they were always flawed, we all knew, on a basic level, they all made mistakes.
Yeah, it's written down.
They all made mistakes, but it wasn't really related. If it's taught in the wrong way or without imagination, it's distant. It's like, well, but we're just telling it as it is. But no, how does that speak to you?
So that's a big piece of my goal. If Rav Sachs and people of his grandeur are able to pull back and show that vision. So my goal is to be able to borrow a phrase from the counseling world, to crystallize that dream into daily actions. To find a way in which a person can feel the grandeur of the mission to serve the goodness of creation, and not just be overwhelmed by the responsibility or to fall into abstractions and contemplations, but say, okay, wake up this morning, I know how to do it. I know how to see the good which is not yet in the world around me. I know how to go beyond my limits in order to make it happen. It might be as a parent, it might be as a spouse, it might be in work, it might be on the battlefield. It could be in all those places. But a person, when they know what their nefesh is, what their limited self, is able to then go beyond that limit and discover the fact that, of course, we were created as pieces of the infinite. And in service of the infinite, there's nothing we can't do. And if we can't do it, it means we're not meant to. But that doesn't mean we're not meant to try.
Where can people find the course, and where's it up to at the moment?
So God willing, the launch is come this summer. You can go to 𝗙𝗧𝗪𝗏.com and get the picture and what's happening. But if people want to connect to the work that I'm doing, ravmike.com. Find everything I'm doing there in my counseling, in my creative consulting. You can find the Jewish story and the other content that I put out. It's all there, ravmike.com. It's the easiest place.
We're good. We did it.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really glad that we made it happen.
Yeah.
And I look forward to the conversation going on.